That's literally everything I had. My whole life's gone.
You know what I mean?
Nothing like it.
He was the face of raw speed, the man who brought chaos, heart, and danger to Street Outlaws. Kamikaze Chris wasn't just another racer, he was the one fans couldn't stop watching. Then, out of nowhere, he vanished. No crash, no goodbye, just silence. For years, everyone kept asking the same question: why? Why did one of the most fearless drivers in the game suddenly disappear? Rumors spread like wildfire: fights, money issues, betrayal, and a fallout inside the Oklahoma Street Kings. But the truth is far more brutal. They took everything, Kamikaze says. My car, my crew, my name, my peace. So what really happened to Kamikaze Chris? Why did the brotherhood that built him turn their backs on him? And who was behind the silence that kept his story buried for so long? Don't skip this video, because what you're about to hear will change everything you thought you knew about Street Outlaws. Kamikaze Chris earned his name in Oklahoma's street racing scene long before Street Outlaws. He wasn't backed by sponsors or big budgets, just skill, nerve, and a willingness to push harder than most. The nickname Kamikaze came from that fearless style of driving that often left others backing off while he stayed in the throttle. When Street Outlaws began, he joined the street racing family crew as a genuine racer, not a made-for-TV personality. His El Camino wasn't a showpiece car, it was fast, handmade, and built on his own dime. That authenticity connected with viewers who saw him as one of them, a racer first, a TV face second. Even with national attention, Chris kept operating the same way: small garage, limited funding, and long nights rebuilding what broke. The exposure didn't mean easy money. The costs of racing still came straight out of his pocket. Kamikaze's rise wasn't about fame, it was about reputation. He built it through real racing, real effort, and real risk, and that independence, while respected, would later make him one of the most vulnerable drivers when things started to go wrong. At his peak on Street Outlaws, Kamikaze Chris looked like he had it all: fame, fans, and one of the most recognizable cars in the street racing family, the El Camino, or Elco. But behind the noise and recognition, the reality was far less glamorous. Unlike some racers backed by sponsors or big shops, Chris ran things independently. Most of the work happened in his own garage, surrounded by friends, late nights, and borrowed tools. Every repair, every part, every rebuild, it came straight from his pocket. What viewers saw as success was actually survival. The show gave exposure, not stability. Appearance fees helped with travel, but not with the huge costs of racing. Engines, tires, and damage repairs easily burned through whatever money came in. The faster the competition got, the more expensive it became just to keep up. Chris prided himself on doing things his way: no shortcuts, no fake drama. But independence came with a cost. When something broke, there was no safety net. And as Street Outlaws grew into a national brand, the pressure to perform on camera grew with it. To fans, he seemed fearless. But behind that confidence was a growing sense of exhaustion, a realization that the fame didn't fix the stress, it only made the stakes higher. And soon, that pressure would push everything: the car, the finances, and the man himself right to the breaking point. By the time Street Outlaws reached its peak, the competition had changed. Cars were getting faster, budgets were getting bigger, and television expectations kept growing. For independent racers like Kamikaze Chris, that shift created serious pressure. Unlike some of the other drivers backed by sponsors or established shops, Chris was still operating with limited resources. Every upgrade came out of his pocket, and keeping the Elco competitive required constant investment: engines, transmissions, tires, and parts that could cost tens of thousands each year. The show's exposure helped his name, but it didn't guarantee financial stability. Fans often assume that TV racers make a lot of money, but most of them don't. The network covers production, the racers cover the racing. That means when something breaks, and it always does, the expenses fall directly on the driver. Chris was juggling that reality while trying to maintain a national TV presence. Over time, the stress became visible. The Elco was fast but unpredictable, and keeping it in shape required both money and focus. He was dealing with mechanical issues, travel demands, and the fatigue that comes from constantly chasing performance without the financial cushion others had. Behind the scenes, that lifestyle started taking a toll. The pressure to perform for TV, stay relevant in the street racing family, and keep the car running created a cycle that was hard to sustain. There's a point where passion starts to feel like survival, and Chris was getting close to it. For fans, everything looked normal. The races aired, the crowd cheered, and Kamikaze was still smiling on camera. But off camera, the cracks were starting to show. The burnout, the expenses, and the non-stop grind were beginning to catch up, and it was only a matter of time before something major gave way, and it did. The crash wasn't part of a script, it was real, and it nearly ended everything Kamikaze Chris had built. In 2021, while racing the El Camino, the Elko, one wrong move sent the car into a violent wreck that fans still talk about. The impact was brutal enough to destroy most of the front end, twisting the chassis and snapping components that had taken years to perfect. When the smoke cleared, Chris climbed out under his own power. He was lucky to be alive, but from that moment on, everything about his career changed. The wreck became a turning point not just because of the damage, but because of what it revealed. Up until then, fans saw the wins, the speed, the adrenaline. What they didn't see was how fragile the balance behind the scenes really was. The Elko wasn't a team-funded car, it was a personal project built mostly from Chris's own pocket, with limited sponsorship help. Every upgrade and repair came from the same small circle of friends who had helped him since day one. When the car went down, so did his financial stability. Replacing that setup meant tens of thousands of dollars, parts, fabrication, paint, labor, and none of it was covered by the show. Street Outlaws paid appearance fees, not repair bills. That's something many viewers never realize. When a driver crashes, it's their problem, not the network's. The timing couldn't have been worse. Supply chain issues in late 2020 and 2021 had already pushed part prices up. Shops were backed up for months, and getting materials for a complete rebuild was nearly impossible. Even basic items like tires and fuel became expensive. Every dollar he had saved from the show was now being funneled into trying to resurrect the Elko. For a while, Chris kept quiet. He didn't post dramatic updates or GoFundMe links. That's not who he is. He stayed off social media, working behind closed doors to assess what could be salvaged. But silence breeds speculation, and the online community filled in the blanks with rumors, claims that he'd quit, that he was broke, that the producers had cut him off. The truth was more complicated. Rebuilding the Elko wasn't just about fixing a car, it was about deciding whether the fight was still worth it. The crash exposed how much the show had taken from him physically, financially, and mentally. Fans loved the adrenaline, but for Chris, that lifestyle had started to feel like quicksand. One mistake, and everything he'd built could disappear overnight. After months of silence, a few photos surfaced online showing the wrecked shell of the Elko sitting in his shop. It looked worse up close than anyone expected, a reminder of how unforgiving street racing can be. Some close friends described that period as the lowest point in his career. He wasn't filming, wasn't racing, and wasn't sure if he'd ever bring the car back. Behind the scenes, the lack of activity created tension. The Street Outlaws schedule kept moving, and new cars filled the gaps. Without a running car, Chris had no way to stay on the list or maintain regular appearances. That meant no paycheck and no sponsor exposure, a double hit that put him in a financial hole. By early 2022, the harsh reality set in. Rebuilding the Elko the way it used to be would take more money than he could justify. He started parting out old components, trading or selling items to cover costs. Friends offered help, but pride made him turn most of it down. Chris wasn't the kind of person to ask for charity. To make matters worse, the show's production structure had changed. Budgets were tighter, and producers were prioritizing drivers who could guarantee race-ready vehicles. That shift left him on the outside looking in. No Elko, no screen time, no income, and the audience that once cheered for him started wondering if he'd disappeared for good. The crash didn't just wreck a car, it exposed the entire system around Street Outlaws. It showed how fragile the line between success and survival really is in this world. For a while, Chris thought about walking away completely, taking the lesson, closing the chapter, and moving on. But the thing about racers is, they don't quit easily. Even after everything, he held onto the shell of the Elko, telling friends that one day he'd bring it back, not for TV, not for fame, but because he couldn't stand to let it end that way. The wreck was the beginning of the end for his TV run, but it was also the start of something more personal, a hard reset on what racing really meant to him. And as he started picking through the wreckage, trying to rebuild both the car and his confidence, the silence around him only grew louder. Because the next part of his story wouldn't happen on camera. It would happen in real life, and for Kamikaze Chris, that's where the fight really began. After the 2021 crash, Kamikaze Chris' time on Street Outlaws quietly came to an end. With the Elko destroyed, he no longer had a race-ready car, which meant he couldn't stay on the list, the backbone of the show. Once a racer is off the list, their screen time disappears almost overnight. There was no public statement or farewell episode. Fans just noticed he stopped appearing. Neither Discovery nor Chris addressed it directly, which led to speculation online. The truth was more straightforward. Rebuilding the Elko was too expensive, and production had moved on to drivers who could race consistently. At that point, the show itself had changed. Budgets tightened and producers leaned toward racers with shop backing or sponsorships who could guarantee active participation. Chris, always independent, didn't fit that mold. His low-profile nature and refusal to chase scripted drama made him valuable to fans but difficult for television. Privately, he grew frustrated with how the show had shifted away from its raw street roots. For someone who joined to represent real racing, it no longer felt authentic, so instead of forcing a comeback, he stepped back. By 2022, it was clear he wasn't returning. No rebuild, no new appearances, just silence. But his reputation stayed intact. Within the community, he's still seen as one of the few who kept it real, even when walking away meant losing the spotlight. For Chris, leaving wasn't failure, it was freedom from a system that stopped resembling the streets he came from. After stepping away from Street Outlaws, Kamikaze Chris faced the kind of challenges most fans never see once the cameras stop rolling. The show had brought him national attention, but it didn't bring long-term financial security. When the appearances ended, so did the consistent income. Racing costs remained high, but the sponsorship opportunities tied to TV exposure quickly disappeared. Financial strain was only part of it. There's also the personal adjustment that comes with losing structure and purpose. For years, his life revolved around racing schedules, filming deadlines, and mechanical projects. When that disappeared, so did the daily rhythm that kept him focused. Like many reality TV racers, the transition back to normal life wasn't easy. Those close to him have said he stayed busy in smaller ways, working on local cars, helping friends, and maintaining ties to the Oklahoma racing scene, but on a much lower profile. He avoided public attention, and that silence led to rumors about his health, finances, and relationships. Most of those claims were exaggerated. The truth was simpler: he was burned out and needed distance. The pressure of years spent under bright lights and high stakes doesn't go away quickly. There's a mental toll in going from being recognized nationwide to being almost invisible in the same community you helped build. Chris rarely spoke about it publicly, but insiders described him as more private and selective about where he put his time. Today, he remains respected by fans and racers who value authenticity. His story is a reminder that behind every televised success are real people managing exhaustion, loss, and financial pressure, things that don't make it into the final edit. For Kamikaze, the fight didn't end when the cameras stopped. It just became quieter and far more personal. When Street Outlaws ended for Chris Kamikaze, the hardest part wasn't financial, it was psychological. For nearly a decade, racing defined who he was. Every routine, every relationship, every goal revolved around building and driving the Elko. Once that was gone, so was his sense of direction. People close to him say the adjustment was rough. Going from constant adrenaline and recognition to a quiet, everyday routine created a mental gap that's common among retired racers and TV figures. There's no manual for stepping out of the spotlight. One day you're part of a culture everyone talks about, and the next, it keeps going without you. Chris handled it privately. He didn't post updates or chase relevance. Instead, he focused on small projects and personal time. The withdrawal wasn't drama, it was reflection. His story shows what happens when identity is built entirely around momentum. When the engine stops, the silence forces you to face yourself. And for Kamikaze, that silence became the hardest race of all. In the years after leaving Street Outlaws, Kamikaze Chris quietly redefined what racing meant to him. He didn't return with big announcements or sponsorship deals, he started small, rebuilding confidence before rebuilding cars. Sources close to him say he still works on vehicles locally, occasionally attending regional races or helping friends with their setups. The focus now isn't exposure or television, it's the craftsmanship itself. After years of cameras and production schedules, Chris values control over pace working when he wants, on what he wants. He's also become more selective about public appearances, preferring low-profile events where the emphasis is on skill, not fame. For many fans, his absence is noticeable, but for Chris, it's balance. The rebuild isn't about reviving the Elko or chasing old fame, it's about restoring normal life after years in the spotlight. Today, Kamikaze's speed isn't measured in miles per hour anymore, it's in how steadily he's rebuilding himself without needing an audience to watch. There was no scandal, no fallout, just burnout, fatigue, and the reality that independence in racing comes with limits. What fans saw as a disappearance was actually a reset. Today, he remains respected by both racers and longtime viewers for one simple reason: he stayed real. In an industry built on image, that's rare. Chris may not be racing for cameras anymore, but his story continues to represent what street racing was always meant to be: personal, risky, and completely authentic. If you found this breakdown helpful and want more real stories behind the racers you watched on Street Outlaws, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications.